To recap very quickly, we spoke about some very big ideas. One, that repentance is really to return to your true self, to your true divine self. The other idea is that as we return to our true self and as we live a life that's guided by a true divine self, we have to accept the fact that that life will be restless, because if we are returning to our divine self, that means we're returning to God, and God is infinite, and therefore our journey will be infinite with growth and climbing, maybe even challenges, but hopefully good ones. That was concept number two. We also spoke about the need to recognize the bad for what it was, and as we look towards our past, but also to not throw it away, but rather to grow from it, to learn from the experience that it gave us, from the lessons that it shared with us. And in a way, if we can spring forth from the bad that we were enmeshed in, then we can also transform that bad into good. That's why the Talmud says that where the Ba'alei Teshuvah, where the people who return, stand, even the complete righteous cannot stand, because they went really to those levels that the righteous don't go to, of course, those levels of bad, and they were able to transform them. So we spoke about that. We also spoke about the idea that tikkun is not rectification, but it's rather transformation, speaking exactly about this idea of transforming the world, not just repairing it. And last but not least, we also spoke about the idea that doing teshuvah is recognizing what is important and recognizing what is trivial, and knowing the exact difference between the two. And this idea that sometimes, there are forces of evil that attach themselves to us like parasites. That was the example used. And that maybe sometimes, by the way, this is a sign, like we spoke about the Jerusalem syndrome, if you recall, and so on. This is a sign that there's tremendous holiness. Whenever there's tremendous holiness, of course, there'll be, as Albert Einstein put it, violent opposition, by mediocre minds. That was his line, Einstein's line. But same year in Kabbalah, whenever there's tremendous holiness, there's always opposing forces that try and squash it. And we have to recognize, therefore, that these evil forces are just a sign that we're in the right direction. And it shouldn't intimidate us, but quite the opposite, they should encourage us. So that was yet another big idea. Again, we're now the very last paragraph of this beautiful chapter Repentance. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? The penitent thus does more than return to his proper place. That line.
I can read if you want.
Oh, please.
The penitent.
Vicky, thank you.
Okay. The penitent thus does more than return to his proper place. He performs an act of amendment of cosmic significance. He restores the sparks of holiness which have been captured by the powers of evil. The sparks that he has dragged down and attached to himself are now raised up with him, and a host of forces of evil return and are transformed to forces of good. This is the significance of the statement of the Talmud that in the place where a completely repentant person stands, even the most saintly cannot enter, because the penitent has at his disposal not only the forces of good in his soul and in the world, but also those of evil, which he transforms into essences of holiness.
Right. So this is really one of the great introductions or ideas of Kabbalah, and that is that there are sparks in this world that are imprisoned. That's really the word is used, that are imprisoned by evil forces. And when a person engages with evil doings, and then he returns, he's able to really redeem those sparks with him as he returns. In fact, Kabbalah teaches, the Zohar, the foremost book of Kabbalah, teaches that with the sin of Adam and Eve eating from the forbidden tree, from the tree of knowledge, the world was shattered. The spiritual world, at least, unified with this world was shattered, and then 288 sparks of divinity got lost in the world and again imprisoned by evil forces. And it is the task of humanity to redeem those 288 sparks. Yitzchak Luria speaks about, and now I'm getting a very mystical, but just wait for just a few more. Yitzchak Luria says that these 288 individual sparks, they themselves are broken into multiple sparks. So potentially you could have thousands and thousands of sparks that are derivatives of those 288 sparks that are imprisoned by evil forces in this world. Now, each time we use this world, whether through the return from evil, like we're speaking about, or just simply we're using this world to do something, we are, and eventually Mashiach will come, the great redemption will happen when all of these will have been redeemed. Say a blessing over a people. When I give money, which is very materialistic, but I give it to charity, or whether I take a cow and use its parchment, its skin to make parchment for a mezuzah and so on. Whenever I use anything of this world, I am redeeming a spark. I'm not just doing a mitzvah. I'm not just doing that which is commanded upon me, but I'm actually bettering the world. That's why really tikkun olam, as we've mentioned 9 times, it's not referring just to specific actions versus the other. It's not just referring to me bettering humanity and going out to people or doing social justice and whatever it may be. Just doing a mitzvah is tikkun olam, even if it's a very private one, even if it has nothing to do with anyone. Just doing a mitzvah is repairing the world, because I'm redeeming that spark by using the world and elevating it to a higher place, to a better place. That's really the idea here. And now the one that does that the most, of course, is the Baal Teshuvah, who went to the lowest levels of the world and returned from there. And as he returns from there, he redeems those sparks that were imprisoned maybe from the sin of Adam and Eve, from those times. Now, that's why there's the Talmud reminds me just of a verse in the Talmud. There's a prophet that says, "V'shav Hashem Elokecha et shvutecha, v'richamcha v'kibetzcha mikol ha'amim asher dachta sham." But what it says is that God will gather us and return. V'shav Hashem Elokecha et shvutecha, will return all those people and all those things that are lost. Now, it doesn't, and the Talmud points out, it doesn't say that God will make people return. It says Veshav, lo veheshiv, which means that God himself will return. You might think that God, the redemption, that ultimate redemption, is God making people return, or sparks return, or the world return to a divine state. No, it's not God making return, not veheshiv, but Veshav. It's God himself returning, as if God himself is in exile. And when that redemption happens, God himself too is returning with the people, with humanity, with the world itself to a divine state. Why is that? Again, so Kabbalah explains that's because there are divine sparks. So God, in a way, is in exile too. And each time we do a mitzvah, we are redeeming God. Think about that. We are releasing God from prison, a part of God, a spark of God at least, from prison. Now, so imagine that level of connection with godliness. Imagine that gratitude, that debt of gratitude that God has towards you. Each time you do that mitzvah, you've released him, you've redeemed him. And that's again, Ronnie, I know you trying to, no, go ahead. But we can't hear you. That's what I'm trying to say.
Let me push my mic down. How's that? Okay, thank you.
Now we can hear you. There you go.
So in doing a mitzvah, you talked about that there is good that's imprisoned by evil.
In a way, yeah. Yeah. That's
no,
right.
I mean, you specifically said that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so is there a difference in the mitzvah that you did when you gave tzedakah? Is there other mitzvahs? I don't see that mitzvah being imprisoned by evil. And
What do you mean? No, what you are using for the mitzvah was imprisoned by evil.
What was I using? What was I using? I want to learn. What was I using?
So the money, for example,
yes.
The money was strictly materialistic before you used it for a mitzvah. Now that you used it for a mitzvah, you've really made it spiritual, and therefore you've redeemed the potential of spirituality from within it.
It would just seem that there are deeper things, deeper good that's imprisoned by evil.
Right, of course. I mean, you have the more revealed good, right? That's imprisoned by evil. Absolutely. But I'm saying on a mystical level, on a spiritual level, you also have all these sparks that are imprisoned by evil. And what does it mean to be imprisoned? To be means that you are being
a captive.
Right, exactly. You are being captive. Your potential, therefore, is also being very limited, if not completely squashed, and therefore not necessarily in a revealed way, at least divine. But the minute a person is redeemed from captivity, is freed from prison, then a person's potential is also freed, and then the divinity within him can also find expression, and then it becomes revealed, and that's when those sparks that we are speaking about really are elevated, are freed. So that's the idea, and I agree with you. Of course, there's revealed good that's in prison, and there's also not revealed good that's in prison. But we have to keep in mind that each time we do a mitzvah, whether with something that's revealed or not, we are redeeming those sparks. Yeah.
Rabbi,
yes. Joyce,
yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Everyone. I just had an image when you were talking. It was that like a bird in a cage. I don't know why I just saw a bird in a cage, a little bird with a beautiful song, and it's kind of captured. But if the door's open and the bird is freed, it can sing its song to the world. It can sing everywhere. So I don't know. I just saw that in my and
right.
And I don't know if that's relevant, but metaphorically, it spoke
right.
what you're saying, and you know what you were at the question.
Right. No, it's so beautiful. Look, I since we're learning Rabbi Steinsaltz's book here, I will share with you, and I'm happy to find it and maybe then share it in the chat, or I'll send it later on to you, Gila. But I just reread the script of a speech that is on YouTube by the Steven Spielberg archives of Rabbi Steinsaltz, a speech of Rabbi Steinsaltz in 1989 in Jerusalem to world Jewish leaders, world Jewish community leaders. And I believe, I mean, my humble opinion, it's one of his most resounding speeches, or how should I put it, awakening speeches. But it's a speech in which he speaks about the midrash that says, and I want to relate this idea to this, but the midrash says that the small children are called messiahs. King David says in the book of Psalms, I think it's Psalm 7, Al tigu b'mshichai, do not touch my messiahs. And the midrash says, Elu tinokot shel bet rabban. These are the children. Children are called messiahs. Why are they called messiahs? And he explains that every child is born with what he calls, Rabbi Steinsaltz calls, a messiah complex. What's a messiah complex? Messiah complex is a complex in which I want to save the world. That's what the Messiah will do. Come and save the world. Every child is born, and we spoke a little bit about this in the previous class, but every child is born with this great desire to make a huge impact on the world and eventually save it. Now, do not touch my messiahs. What King David is saying is that do not touch those dreams. Because as we grow up, our dreams are compromised. And we realize, those crazy dreams we had when we were small, they are crazy. They're not feasible. And we should never think like the way we thought when we were children. I mean, don't we know that we have bills to pay and that we have challenges to face, and it's going to be impossible to save the world? And yet King David comes and says, no, don't touch those dreams. Don't touch that Messiah complex. Allow it to bother you. Allow it to drive you crazy, because you can and you ought to change the world. You have that divine soul. So go and release it altogether. Unleash its potential. Don't imprison it, as we're speaking about. And there he uses many analogies, but one analogy that really struck me. The analogy of the Eastern European Jewish parent. The Eastern European Jewish parent some 200 years ago, say, or even 100 years ago, maybe even 70, 80 years ago, was a parent that had to do a lot. They had to do a lot, not just provide for their families, not just, suffer a lot of the consequences and circumstances of the time, but they also had to try and make those happen. And they did so. Many of them did so. Now today we live, thank God, a much more comfortable life. And he asks the question, what happened to that parent? We don't see the same force. We don't see the same might. We don't see the same, impossibilities being created by them. We saw 7 years ago, 100 years, an analogy, that's the point I want to make. Imagine you take the engine of a plane and you put it in the engine of a car. Now, he says that's the way he sees this. Once upon a time, people had engines of planes, but they themselves were planes. So they flew. Today, we still have the same engine. God creates us the same way, but we become cars. So what are we going to do? Are we really going to fulfill the purpose of that engine that we have? And therefore, it's time for cars to be planes again. It's time for us to become messiahs again, as we were when we were small children. It's time for us to redeem those sparks. And in a way, a lot of the redemption of those sparks that the Baal Teshuvah, that the person who does Teshuvah does, is saying, you know what, I'm not going to compromise the way I used to compromise. Back then, I compromised with my life, and that led me to doing all sorts of stupid things. But now I'm not going to live a life of compromise. I'm going to live a life in which I will be the best that I can be, not to use any cliche, but really the best that I can be. And that means that to turn myself into a plane, because I know that I have an engine plane, an engine of a plane within me. And that's really what I think that means in the most practical way. But to tie the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz himself, say that that if you want to build a society, then you have to stop dreams. Dreams of a society, that's how the society will be. If small, then our society will be small. It's true. I mean, I think it's very true. It's true not just for societies, for human beings. Beings with big dreams and with the drive to pursue them, or you become, makers. Human beings with small dreams, yeah, I don't know if they become change makers. And it's a pity because those sparks remained imprisoned. Some, but some remain imprisoned. And I think that in a way, that's what symbolized Rabbi Steinsaltz the most. But never ever stop dreaming. There's so many times he would say that the difference between this generation and the previous generation, and you can disagree with him, but that generation, you hear the words of I can't so much more than heard the previous generation. The words that are said are reflective of the discourse and of the inner makings of a generation. It's true for human beings. If you want to know someone, look at what she said. What do they speak about? They speak soccer, or that's what they are. If they speak about food all day, that's what they are. If they speak about dreams, then they dreamers. It's true for societies, the discourse. And if the discourse is I can't, as it is so often in our day and age, then it's very different than the discourse we used to have 50 years ago, where those words barely existed. I don't know, I didn't hear my parents say I can't. Maybe very few times. But I hear my children say I can't all the time. Now, of course, they're children, and we'll see when they grow up. Hopefully, they'll grow out of it. But it's. I don't know if there's any scientific studies about this, but he has a point. Rabbi Steinsaltz has a point. I can't. It's very often more of an excuse than a reality. Sometimes you can, and you want to compromise, and the sparks remain in prison. You know, to use a lower analogy, a baseball analogy, I think it was Pete Rose, who was about to break the record of the all-time hits. And I think he had 82 hits to reach that record left. Now, as you know, baseball players only hit the ball, if they're good, once every 3 pitches that are thrown to them. And so they asked him, how many at-bats, how many pitches will you need to reach that record and hit those 82 hits? So he said 82. He said, it's impossible. Your batting average is .300 or something, so you only hit the ball once every 3 times. So it's impossible, 82. So he said, and this is almost what he said, verbatim. He said, if I, as a baseball player, step in the batter's box, thank you, with the knowledge that I cannot hit that ball, I have no right to step in that box in the first place. It's true for life. If I wake up in the morning with the knowledge that, I'm not going to hit any pitches today, any balls today, I'm not going to do anything today, then maybe I have no right to live that day. But that's the reality. Then those sparks will remain in prison.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I think an important thought here is that having those sparks in prison is part of the growth process to break out of that and to grow.
Right.
And without that imprisonment, there's no growth. We stay static.
Right. No, very well said. Very well said. Absolutely. Yeah, it starts with the mindset. Yeah.
One more thing, if I may. Yeah.
Sure.
You were talking earlier about returning to ourself.
Yeah.
And before we can return to ourself, it's really what the next chapter is about, to search for oneself. And how do you return to oneself if you don't know really who you are?
Right. Absolutely. That's right. And that's where it starts. Now, I will say this, and that's a great question, but very often you don't know who you are, especially if you are enmeshed in so many disturbing things. You're so confused. You've deviated from yourself so much that there's no sense of clarity. So what do you do? Where do you return to? Now, the big idea is this. We know that the self, what we have in common, what all of our true selves have in common, is that they are divine. That's good. And therefore, the way to return to that self, even when you've lost your sense of clarity, is to do good. That will resonate with the self because the self is good.
Absolutely.
And the more you do good, the more that sense of clarity will be restored. And then you'll be able to then, in a way, go from the macro goodness to the micro goodness and see exactly what that purpose within the world of goodness that the soul is in, that the self existing is.
Amen.
Yeah. That's an excellent question. You're right. And I think that's we've spoken about this. And yes, Linda.
Okay, so
yeah,
this whole time you've been talking, my thought process has been really quite different in terms of, these sparks. I look at the sparks as when you say hello to somebody and you smile and the way you travel through life every single day, you're giving off positive energy and sparks. And of course and I think that the way we live our life is a mitzvah. If you are positive and you are kind and you are good. And yes, it's a mitzvah to light Shabbat candles. It's a mitzvah to give tzedakah. But it's like, I think those are defined mitzvahs. And I think that we're missing the point if we don't look at the concept of how we travel in this world with ourselves and with others and with people we don't know, that when there's a homeless person on the street, that you can at least look them in the eye and smile or acknowledge. I mean, I think that, you know, to me, that the concept of mitzvah starts within and how we really relate in the small things, and then it's bigger. So that's really,
yeah, I don't know if that, yeah, no, I would agree with that. But I there's two things I want to point out. One, I don't know if there's an order to this. First within and then without, because as we just mentioned, sometimes the within is so confused. Sometimes the within is lost. So what do? Do you just wait and see that if something can be rebooted? I say no. Then do good.
Well, there doesn't need to be an order. You know, like
right.
I'm not. There
That's
needs
what
to
I'm
be.
saying.
That it's like but it's the. I really believe it's the way you travel in this world.
Right. Right. And that's the second point I want to make, and that is that sometimes I think they go hand in hand. They're actually intrinsically connected. I would use the analogy of a relationship.
Yes, they are. I agree.
Right. And I can be nice to my wife all I want and smile at her and give her compliments all day long. But if at the end of the day she says, go wash your dishes, and I don't, I say, you know what, I love you, and I'll smile and I'll give her.
I'm talking about behaviors.
Right. Like, so you have the behavior, you have the comportment, which is essential, but you also have the deeds that are also essential. I think they go hand in hand. Yeah, but well said. And I think that in a way, if you are in line with that divine self from within, you know, to use the words you used, then the deeds come much more naturally. And then that second part that other facet of goodness also appears. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. No, so thank you.
I've got a question.
Yes, Vicky.
It almost sounds as if, and I'm going to use the word prodigal son, that the prodigal son gets more points, so to speak, than somebody who's been good all their life. So if, you know, if Linda was good all of her life and she is such a positive person and everything's great, and I've been evil, but then I turn good, then I have more perks than Linda does, kind of thing, because I had evil and I had to overcome the evil. I mean, is it really like that? Because you know, it talks about that in this, and it's an interesting concept. But you know, the prodigal son is always been kind of an interesting idea.
Right. No, that's an excellent question, because you're right. It does say that they are, to quote Rabbi Steinsaltz, that a completely repentant person stands on a level than a saintly person. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. First of all, it's not easy to reach that level. It's not just like a return and that's it. But it's the act of transformation that we've been speaking of is a very difficult act and a very challenging one. So if a person can go through that process, then he deserves to. But that's one. Two, I would say that I don't know if he stands on a high level mean that he's a better person, or that we love him more, or whatever, you know, you were implying. I would say that it just means that there are things that he has that the righteous person has, because this chapter, that the righteous person does not have. But because this chapter speaks about return, it focuses just on that prototype. I also believe, though, let's not forget, that the righteous person has things that the person who returns, the penitent, does not have. We haven't spoken about this because it's not in the context of this chapter. But I think that what the righteous person has in terms of his innocence, his purity, his clarity, is much higher than what that other person has.
But that's an interesting concept. If you are pure and you are innocent, it could mean that you have never gone through the trials and tribulations. So a person who is raised in a very religious background, excuse me, my bird's competing with me again, and he's not in a cage, so
Love
that's
that.
probably why. So a
You should
person
bring him
who-
to your camera. We want to see him. He can be a participant in
Okay.
class. Sometimes, no, really. Sometimes, you know, birds have nated souls. By Yitzhak Luria teaches. Who knows? Oh, there you go.
Beautiful.
Wow, so beautiful.
Are you beautiful?
Good.
Are you
What's his name?
Harry?
Harry. Okay. All right.
So,
So
as I
finish the thought. Yeah.
as I was mentioning, if a person is raised in an environment that's pure, and he's going to compete with me, and I'm going to totally lose my point. If a person is raised in a pure environment, in a religious environment where the parents are truly religious, they have it in their hearts, their children are good, and they are homeschooled or they go to a school of like-minded, and they're really pure, and they've actually never seen the horrors of the world. Or you have somebody that was kind of raised on the streets, who has seen the evils, who has lied, cheated, stolen just so that they could get food or whatever. That person, to get to the point of purity, is so much harder. And I'm thinking about even loving, you know, I think about, and I'm doing this personally, it is harder to love somebody, a parent who is nasty or whatever. It takes more love than a parent who is unconditional love, because you don't have to put as much effort towards it.
Right.
So it's just kind of a dichotomy that, you know, it kind of, I mean, when I was reading this beginning of this with the cosmic significance and the sparks and everything, I'm thinking of Star Wars. So I was totally off. But even so, that is a ruling of good and evil, right?
I love it. No, so, I love it. I might have to borrow this bird for a few days, Vicky.
Well,
We
he
have some
does
deep
shout,
conversation.
pick up the phone, and he constantly yells, pick up the phone, Jack, pick up the phone. So
Okay.
you'll be picking up the phone continuously if you have this bird anywhere near you. Right?
That's beautiful. Anyhow, but to relate to this, so look, I would say they each have their own, like I said, they each have own pluses and minuses. But I do think that there's an innocence so pure that you don't find in a person that has returned. Even return is able to be a deeper things, a richer perspective. But that innocence sometimes is so refreshing, to use the very bad analogy. Buying a new brand new shirt that's Christmas, then a shirt that had some stains, and then getting it up from the dry cleaners. So it's a different feeling, and that is picked up from the dry cleaners showed that it is stain proof, and that it can persevere. But on the other hand, there's still something that's special about the new shirt, something that's fresh and crispy. Same year, with people have been able to remain innocent in life, in spite of the temptations, like your bird, and like the special animal. I think there's something very, very, very special, very pure, very holy about that.
Rabbi, I'd like to ask the group, is anyone else experiencing periodic freezing of Rabbi Allouche speaking, and there'll be a freeze on the screen? Diana,
Yes.
you're saying yes. Vicky, you're saying yes.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. Connection. Oh,
Periodically,
I'm so sorry.
your voice will be in and out.
You know what? I'm going to switch. We have two Wi-Fi connections. Yeah, I'm going to switch to the other one, and let's see if that changes things. All right. Okay. Let's see. I just changed to the other one. Let's see if it changes things.
And Rabbi, can I add something here?
Yes, please.
To me, and as a former teacher especially, I'm thinking, who is making the decision And it really isn't us, it really is Hashem. It's not us. And sometimes, as a teacher, there were so many young people who wanted to accomplish, who wanted to help the world, who wanted to, and what they were looking, their way of doing it may be different than what we were taught or what we followed when we were growing up. And here we are judging people who have the same intent that we have, but the world keeps changing. And so I think I don't want to be too hard on the young people and the things they do wrong, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. And that's why at the end of the day, just to add another layer to this, we have really no clue of how God judges and how God means the innocence of people or the penance and the righteous. At the end of the day, that's the department. We have to do what we have to do. And if we deviated from our path, then we have to return. And if we have the privilege of being innocent, then we have to do everything to remain innocent, to remain righteous. But you're right, absolutely. We have no, it reminds me of the Gerer Rebbe, the Chidushei Harim, who was the nickname, the Harim in Hebrew stands for Rabbi Yitzchak Meir. Rabbi Yitzchak Meir, which was his name, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter. And some 200 years ago, they lived in those villages with, the taxis were wagons and horses. And one day I don't know if I've ever shared the story before, but one day he was on a taxi going from one place to another. And the taxi driver, the wagon driver, tells him, hey, do you mind if I stop by this and this person's house? He's going to the same destination and we'll pick him up too. That person's house was the most wicked Jew of the town. What does that mean? That means that this person was apparently very wealthy. He was as stingy as a big miser. He never ever gave a penny to charity. And anyway, the great Rebbe in this wagon is sitting next to the most wicked person of the town. At least that's the way he was coined. And they have a conversation. And this miser tells the Rebbe, can you explain to me something? It says in the Shema that if you God will reward you. And if not, God will punish you with poverty. Says, look, I don't follow any of God's ways, yet I'm the wealthiest Jew of the town. How do you explain that? The Rebbe told him, from your words, I understand that you studied Torah once in your life, right? He says, what do you mean? I never studied Torah. He says, yes, studied Torah. You studied that passage of the Shema. You know it. You just quoted from it. He says, yes, you're right. That passage I did study. And the Rebbe then turns to him and says, well, then do you know what the reward for a Jew like you to study just one passage of the Torah? Much more than the wealth that you have. That's what the reward is for a person like you. But the point he was trying to make is that you never know. Never know. I might be doing just one mitzvah, and for that I have all the rewards in the world. And sometimes I do one mitzvah, no reward, or a tiny reward. And same with, God forbid, sins. We don't know. The point is that we don't know how God measures that. Sometimes, the penitent is higher. Sometimes he's not. That's all in God's department. So I agree with Diana, thank you for mentioning that.
Rabbi, I was just going to sort of mention just two things. Firstly, you may not be able to do much about this, but periodically there's a short freeze when you speak. It's not as bad as it was, but just to say 90% of the time, would you agree, people, are you all, like you're getting about 95%, and there's a slight freeze. So I don't think it's something to be really
I don't know what's happening here today.
But maybe for the next, for a few next class. But what I wanted to say,
have to reboot my computer.
Right. With regard to the topic, I don't think, I shouldn't speak on behalf of one individual who happens to be me, but no one is in a position to judge another human being. When we say God is the true judge, that is, from what I understand, God is the true judge. And therefore, I know you often quote Carl Jung, who I also appreciate certain things that he said. And he said, thinking is difficult, judging is easy. And that's kind of the unfortunate way of the world right now. But my question is specific to Rabbi Steinsaltz's last paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we comparing people? Why are we comparing those that were born, let's say, into who were blessed with being, everyone's blessed in one way or the other, but let's say they were blessed to be born into a religious family with every opportunity to grow and learn and be and develop. And someone else, an orphan growing up on the streets. Is it really fair to even compare? And sometimes you often hear, they'll say, people will say, various rabbis and people will say, you know, if you become more religious, you can become greater. You know, is that just chizuk? In other words, is that a way of grooming and encouraging people to become more religious because it gives them hope that they can attain something of substance, even though they may not have been religious? But why are we comparing people at all?
Right. That's a great question. And I don't know if it's chizuk or not. And I'm very wary about, I don't know. Rabbi Steinsaltz would say, I'm not like those rabbis who have answers to every question. And if you do this, then you'll do that. He says, I don't know, that God reveals himself in the middle of it and tells me what people need. Questions and answers. And I would say the same thing. I really don't know if the magical formula for anyone and everyone, but and I hope I'm hear me.
No, you're breaking up a lot.
Yeah.
Now you're freezing.
I don't know I really know let me switch the other Wi-Fi now one more time and let's see if that works.
Can I make a suggestion? When you freeze,
Yes.
it's a bandwidth issue. If we can, if some of us can just stop our video for a while you're speaking and mute.
Okay, and I'll switch to the other Wi-Fi.
And that may
Also.
help.
Yeah, we should all
Okay.
mute until we have something to say.
I'm really sorry. I'm going to switch to the other Wi-Fi too, and we'll see.
Don't apologize. It's probably because you have so many people that like the class.
No.
You know, God is trying to tell us something. So he's trying to tell us that you're wonderful.
Okay. No, thank you.
If people
Right.
can switch their video off, that will be a significant amount of bandwidth that is saved.
Why don't we just finish? We're almost done.
Okay. No, all right. I just want to I want to relate to what Gila said. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I would look at this from a whole different perspective. And I would say this. I don't think that the time is comparing people. It's not saying, well, if you're righteous, then you are this. And if you're penitent, then you are this. I don't think it's comparing. Why? Because of the verse by King Solomon that says, Ein Adam ba'aretz asher yaseh tov velo yecheta. Ein tzadik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov velo yecheta. There is no such thing as a completely righteous person. Everyone sins, no matter who you are. When you compare two people, you are comparing two distinct individuals. Yeah, everyone is in the same boat. We're all failing from time to time. We all experience sin from time to time. So really what this is saying is that everyone has the opportunity to rise higher than the imaginary tzaddik, than the imaginary righteous person. I hope I wasn't cut, but I think it's a profound idea because I want to take this a step further. And that is that I think this relates to point number one, that you can't judge us. You're right. No one is allowed to judge. And by the way, that's one of the great Hasidic masters would say that's why God really created us with two eyes. Think about this. We only have one nose, one mouth, but why two eyes? And the Hasidic master says so that one eye can look at people favorably, and the other eye you can judge yourself. That's the only person you can judge, yourself. One is used only to look at the good in others. The other one is to look at the bad in you. That's the way he put it. But how does that relate? Because I think in a way that when we accept the fact that we're not allowed to judge, and and that the only person we ought to judge is ourselves, then, in other words, when you accept the fact that it shouldn't look at outwards, but we should look inwards, then when we look inwards, we'll find deficiencies. And when we find those deficiencies, that's when we can grow and get almost chizuk, like you were saying, from that statement. We can be on a higher level. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah?
Very well.
Yes,
Yes.
you all heard me. Okay.
Yes.
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 Okay. All right, fine. So I know we're coming to the end of the class, and I'll try to reboot my computer next class before the class so that this doesn't happen again. I apologize. I really apologize. But just to summarize, since we've reached the end of this chapter, beyond summarizing the topics that we did at the very beginning, I think that what Rabbi Steinsaltz is trying to do throughout this chapter, to lead us to this charge, to this mission, and that is that life is replete with failures, with sins, with deviations, to put it in a better way. And as long as we can muster the courage, turn to that true self, and by returning to that true self to also elevate the bad that we were enmeshed in, then we will have also not just bettered ourselves, we'll have bettered the world. So through, I think brilliantly, what Rabbi Steinsaltz is doing is that through focusing on the self, he's also focusing on the mission of the self to better the world. Now, because everyone has their pathway and therefore their sets of failures, everyone can better the world in their own way by taking those failures that only they experienced, and elevating them. And that's why maybe the Kabbalah teaches that everyone in this world is designated a different part of this world. Not just geographically. We live here in Scottsdale, and we have Scottsdale to take care of. So spiritually speaking, there's another part of this world that's dedicated to us only, to our mission only. And if we can therefore return, each time we fall, return, and before return, and take that part of the world, that spiritual part of the world with us as we return, then we will have fulfilled our mission to better the world in a way that only we can. And that really is, I think, the unannounced message of this chapter. By returning, we're rectifying tikkun olam, but the part of the world that only we can rectify or can transform, can do the tikkun to.